All right. So welcome back, everybody. For those of you that have been with us, you kind of know what to expect. It's always an interesting conversation. We've always got interesting guests. This is another episode of Phoenix VR for Good. We will be talking with Eileen Kane. She's an educator and entrepreneur who contributes to the Arizona startup, women in tech, and science literacy communities. She has a cross-disciplinary background in STEM efforts and community building. Eileen is also a supporter and regular attendee of this meetup, and she's interested in the future of AR and VR, particularly because she's disturbed by the lack of self-reflection in the industry and academia. And I think this is going to be a pretty interesting conversation that we have about poor decisions and basically some guidance on how not to make them. So thank you, Eileen, for setting up this presentation for us. Why don't we talk a little bit about the show? You know, like what should we know before we go into this presentation?
Oh, thanks, Dennis. First of all, thank you everyone for indulging my nerd out with a show from the 1960s. Patrick McGoohan is a rather iconic figure from the time, and he was in a show called Danger Man, which is, think of it as James Bond, but the television series. It was so popular and was such an international hit that he was allowed to go and produce a show of his own devising. So he's sort of the showrunner of a precursor of his time. So in 1966, The Prisoner debuted. It recently celebrated its 50th year anniversary. It was only 2 seasons long and 17 episodes. And it details the story of a secret agent who resigns his position. And the powers that be, in quotation marks, want to know why he resigned. And he refuses to tell them. And so the series starts from that point of view. He's kidnapped and taken to a place called the Village, which you might actually recognize as a tourist attraction in Wales called Port Merion. That's where the Port Merion porcelain comes from, or did at one time. So in the Village, you can't trust anybody. You don't know who's in charge, and if you comply, you'll be rewarded. So I use this show and some of the concepts that McGoohan brought up about are we truly free, to talk about where the future of VR could go. And I sort of think of this talk as VR for bad. So with that, Dennis, do you want to show the trailer for the opening sequence for The Prisoner?
Sure thing. So let's get this going, and hopefully you all can hear the audio. Can you hear the audio?
I don't hear anything.
Okay, hold on. I should be hearing the audio. Here we go, share sound.
There we go.
It's gone.
Sweet.
Where am I?
In the village.
What do you want?
Information.
Whose side are you on?
That would be telling. We want information. Information.
You won't get it.
By hook or by crook. We will.
Who are you?
The new number 2.
Who is number 1?
You are number 6.
I am not a number. I am a free man.
Hello, dear. Hi.
Super trippy. So with
So
that,
there you go.
yeah, with
That's
that,
super
Eileen, the show's yours.
Well, thanks. I'm going to switch over to my screen share, and we'll start to talk about the future of VR and AR using the prisoner as our metaphor. Okay, everybody seeing my screen?
Yep.
Yep.
Awesome. So I originally did this presentation about 6 things not to do in VR or AR, VR for bad. Added 4 more so that we polish it off and give it a new beginning. What's ironic here in this picture is that when the prisoner arrives in the village, he goes to the free information kiosk, which has no information of where he is or how to get out, only the information that the people who operate the village want him to have. So it's not free information. And I want you to think about that when you find free information on the internet. It's not really free, is it? Facebook isn't free, Twitter isn't free. And that is just one of the many themes that the prisoner television show brought up long before we all became algorithms. So the first idea I want you to consider is that this idea that the secret agent cannot be defined as a function, that he has his own privacy, which his agency might think of as secrets. Skinner thought that you can see behavior before and behavior after, but the black box that is our mind, we cannot truly know. However, if you think about VR and certainly the data that's recovered through an AR experience, we can have a sense of what is actually going on between the ears of the user. One of the themes of the prisoner, I am not a number, I am a free man, because nobody in the village has a name. Everybody is assigned a number. And in fact, our protagonist is assigned the number 6. And so that's why the original presentation was 6 things not to do in VR. We are all algorithms now. We are all collections of all of the things that we have bought because people want to sell us more things. But what about people who want to sell us ideas, or people who want to sell us behaviors or opinions? So this is an idea that I originally brought up during my presentation about 2 years ago. That is controversial. In my youth, there were the spouses, wives of senators and representatives of Congress who wanted the music industry to label particularly rap albums, but music that was explicit, because, you know, their precious children brought home things that had naughty words in it and, you know, derogatory things about women. And I remember Frank Zappa, who is recently featured in, I think, an Oscar-nominated short documentary about his life called Zappa. who said, well, who are you? Who are you to decide what is acceptable? Who elected you? What expertise do you have? So the music industry voluntarily agreed to put these ratings on music. And you can see um, cable also agreed to do that because they were not subject to the rules that broadcast television was subject to. The idea was that broadcast television belongs to all of us because the airwaves are free. So we license them, and in return for the license, broadcast channels are required to do certain educational programming between certain hours of the day and to basically keep explicit stuff off of television when children are watching. All of that is out the window now, right? So we have these ratings here. I want you to consider, what if you were going to have a VR experience, you're handed the helmet, and you're given a disclosure. This experience might change your mind. This experience might bring up something emotionally painful, like you're going to go through a simulated funeral. You're going to attend somebody's funeral. This experience might be funny. This experience might be sad. And you're giving consent to feeling something that does not come from reality or from an experience that we would call, quote, real. Now, we don't give consent when we read a novel. We want to be surprised, and we want to see and hear new concepts from filmmakers and music and books. But we don't explicitly consent when we sit and partake of, these kinds of experiences. We might know a little bit about them before we pick them up, and we have the ability to put them down, stop the music, walk out of the movie. But in a VR experience, there might be a manipulation where you cannot leave, so that this pre-consent might be even more important. Because once you step over the threshold, you may not have clues about how to step back from that threshold. So what if we had ratings about what this experience would be like? Particularly for parents. Parents might think like, oh, it's a walk through the forest. What effect would this have on a toddler's brain if a toddler went on this experience? Do we even know? On the other hand, I remember when the explicit labels started to go onto albums, and everybody wanted that album. All the kids, you were 12, if you had one of those explicit CDs, so I'm very old. Yeah, you were awesome. You were the coolest kid around. I remember when the Vatican stopped putting out their list of books that good Catholics shouldn't read. It was during the first edition of the first book in the Harry Potter series, and they stopped doing it because people would just go out and buy those books. If you tell me not to do it, maybe I will do it, and that then would also be the unintended consequences of putting ratings or a pre-consent on an experience. So just something I want you to think about. One of the first themes I wanted to talk about is choice. In a VR experience, do you actually have a real choice to agree or disagree with what is going to happen? For instance, would we have ethical guidelines for people who construct VR experiences so that everybody knows what the exit gesture would be? Like, this is too much, or hey, I had chili for lunch, so I can't complete this experience right now. So I want to get out of this experience. On websites, we know that the menu is usually at the top of the page. The hamburger symbol, which is just those 3 lines, usually means that you can expand a menu, and this is sort of an agreed upon across the internet culture. What within a VR culture would we say, this is our gesture of exit? Also, what kind of choices do we actually have in the VR experience? I used to run a Socrates Cafe discussion group, and everyone had the option to say nothing if they just wanted to observe and listen. Could you have that experience in a VR experience? It would be pretty boring, but would we also put that as part of an ethical pledge that somebody who was constructing a VR experience, that if somebody wanted to just stand in the corner or they wanted to slow down the experience, they would have the choice to do that. One of the themes within The Prisoner was about how keeping the villagers compliant was important to keep violence from happening, people trying to escape, or chaos. So one day, the figure that runs the village, number 2, said, "Well, this is a republic. You could run. You could become number 2." And this became an episode where the actor Patrick McGoohan, who really had some issues with what was happening to democracy in 1967, about how candidates were being sold as a commodity rather than their ideas or their empathy with how to govern other people as a representative of a republic. So think about all of those folks who opted out of our election, saying, "Well, there's no real choice between the two people that we have." What could we do in an augmented reality where choice is not really choice? Consent. There are lots of themes where drugs are used against the prisoner to try and get to the reason that he resigned from being a secret agent. The truth is that there may not be the former secret agent, the prisoner, may not even know why he did what he did. But remember, this was the 1960s, and we were talking about experiments with LSD, the rising hippie culture, and McGoohan wanted to talk a little bit about how drugs might manipulate our ability to consent. So there's an episode where they can manipulate his dreams and have other characters ask him, "So, why are you defecting? Why are you leaving?" It soon becomes apparent that he actually manipulates the scientists themselves by not taking the drugs, not consenting to actually participate in this. And then he manipulates his own dreams. But one of the themes of The Prisoner is the idea that freedom is a myth. In a VR or an AR experience, while we talk about it as an experience, sort of like those books for middle grade students that were called Choose Your Own Adventure. Well, you weren't really free to choose your own adventure. There were only 6 of them to choose from. And a VR experience is still the experience of that the coder will allow you to have. This is something that McGoohan actually said after The Prisoner had been released, and people kept asking him about it. I'm going to warn you, give you a spoiler, that it has a very ambiguous ending that has infuriated some people. I think it's kind of operatic and rather fun. But this is something that he said about our experiences, even in what we call the free Western democracy. What I think is really interesting is that while he didn't anticipate what was going to come with the internet and social media, you could basically just substitute those for what he's talking about here, being caught along a stream that eventually leads to an avalanche. And what could we say? Can we say the January 6th incident, violent riot at the Capitol was something that was pushed along by our manipulations of our algorithms? Another issue to consider in virtual reality is identity. What if, say, Dennis and I switch places in virtual reality? And we don't really tell you, but his avatar is now my avatar, and my avatar is now his avatar. How does that change your experience and how you interact with each of us? There could be something really interesting that you could do in VR. Suppose somebody was a chronic harasser in an organization. And so they give him one last chance, and he gets to trade places with a woman and have a firsthand experience of being, harassed, demeaned, threatened in a VR experience. In fact, maybe that would be the future of what our anti-bias training would look like. If are part of the reason that we make the choices we make are because of the experiences that we have, and we change identities in VR, how authentic was our original identity, which could be a good thing. Maybe this is something that we could use to deprogram somebody who is deep down in white supremacy or religious cult. In this particular episode, they found a doppelganger, manipulated the doppelganger into thinking that he was number 6, the prisoner, and so introduced him to the prisoner, who then in turn started to doubt who he actually was, but eventually drove his doppelganger insane. Another theme in The Prisoner is memory. If we are our memories, if our memories shape us, what if we took those memories and then manipulated those? There was this idea that by taking a psychoactive drug shortly after you've had a traumatic experience, you could prevent that experience from encoding into your long-term memory, thus actually avoiding having PTSD. It's an interesting idea, but there are many people who have, let's say, not neurotypical viewpoints on the world, who say that this is part of who I am. You might think that I'm suffering with OCD. You might think that I'm particularly disabled because I have Asperger's. But what about the consent of saying that this is who I am? In The Prisoner, memory is actually used to try and make the prisoner doubt that that his identity is to be in opposition of people who are trying to manipulate him. So if they give him a memory that he was in fact one of these people who was manipulating other people, then it challenges his whole concept of his identity as, say, a hero or as a Robin Hood. This is something that Dennis and I have talked about, the definition of torture and how torture could be done in VR. We think about torture as something that would remain on the body and in the psyche. But what if, without touching somebody, you could give them the experience as described in the Geneva Convention here, that you have been harmed by discrimination, by coercion, by mental suffering, or you even think that you have actually been physically harmed, but in fact, you have just been wearing a helmet. There's another aspect of this that we had talked about. There were psychologists who were drummed out of the American Psychological Association because they were associated with Guantanamo Bay as consultants. These psychologists, in their defense, said that, well, we're not government agents, we're just consultants. So we are not participants in torture. So you're a VR creator, and you are contracted with a government agency. And this government agency would like to have you show people the viewpoint of one of their departments. And that sounds innocuous, but how far could that really go? When we talk about manipulation, PTSD, torture. In this particular illustration here, there was a piece of technology that Patrick McGoohan wanted everybody in the village to fear, because at one point the psychological manipulation might break down, and you still needed to be able to subdue people. And the technology that they came up with, it just would not work on camera. Remember, this is 1966. So they borrowed a weather balloon. And so this bouncing weather balloon became the nemesis known as Rover. And it was mysterious about what it actually did. But it was implied that it was somehow a horrifying experience. So we have a Rover in VR, but there's no marks on you. And another idea from the prisoner was the concept of the agreement of reality. You and I agree that this table in front of us is real, that we are speaking to each other during this particular time frame in this time period. In VR, you can pre-record pieces so that you're not speaking in the same time frame. You don't agree that you are actually together. What does together mean in that particular kind of reality? There are manipulations in the prisoner talking about somebody who takes on another identity. Yesterday he was this person. Today, number 5 is a completely different person, but number 5 insists that he has never been a different person. So whose reality is the prevailing reality? In VR, it is really all about changing an agreed upon reality. Would we talk to people about consenting to enter into a different reality that could make you dizzy or sick, or could change your mind? Or what if we didn't tell somebody that they were entering into a different reality? What if somebody was waking up from a coma and they had a helmet on and they didn't know they had a helmet on? Could we manipulate someone's concept of happiness by manipulating their concept of reality? So that brings me to the idea of imprisonment. At one point in one of the episodes from The Prisoner called Many Happy Returns, the prisoner escapes. He returns to London. He finds that there's somebody else in his house, and that the people at work didn't miss him because, well, he resigned. So they just thought he went off on vacation, or at least that's what they say has happened. So he becomes obsessed with finding this place, dismantling it, blowing it up, and just ends up being returned to it. What if we redefined imprisonment as you have to spend X number of hours with a helmet on? And because of the time dilation with VR, you might think that you've had the helmet on for 20 minutes, but you've actually been in prison for 2 days. What if the helmet doesn't even make you feel like you have been imprisoned, but your time has been removed from you? Another concept in the village is work. You're given credits for being compliant. That's a kind of strange concept of work. It's usually labor exchange for goods and services. And between us and the goods and services, we have money, the concept of money. Then we have investing money in somebody else's work and getting a dividend from that investment. Now we have cryptocurrency, which is not real currency, and it is not actually tied to labor. You could say it's tied to energy if you're going to talk about, say, the electricity used for mining Bitcoin. But how would virtual reality change our idea of work? What if work becomes, you become a product tester? That seems pretty benign. What if work becomes the work to become re-educated so that you can move up in the hierarchy of your society? What about work, information work, that would only give you just little pieces of your virtual reality that then you fill in the gaps, and this data is then used to change somebody else's reality. And also we have the concept of love. Love in virtual reality could get pretty weird, pretty kinky. Same kind of problems you have with catfishing on the internet. Are you in love with a person that you think that you're in love with? But I wanted to talk about these other ideas of changing a reality with smells and experiences. So we talk about pheromones that, you know, some scientists really don't think that humans have pheromones, that this is just something that animals have. There are others who think that we do. What if we discovered a chemical that we could have the helmet release and we would feel happy and calm? What if we could have an experience within virtual reality, like, say, intimacy, that releases different hormones in our brain that make us more attached to that person? Could we then take that type of experience and then use it the way some fascist regimes have used work camps to re-educate somebody to love the leader, like, say, Winston in 1984? Then lastly, let's talk about VR and our experience of death. I think the worst thing that you could do to Patrick McGoohan is to take his digital presence and revive him. This is something that he would absolutely not want, but it's not his choice. It's the choice of his heirs. That's how it works legally. I remember when I was a teenager, they did a commercial of Fred Astaire dancing with a Hoover. That was quite mind-boggling for many people, technologically speaking, but it was also deeply offensive to people who were his fans from years ago. That this was just not something that he would likely do, but it was the choice of his heirs to have this done. So remember all those terms of service that you have to click through for any number of online products that you use: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. How about even Canva? What if you leave a digital trail of yourself through all of those things? Not just the images that you upload or the videos that people could see, not just deep fakes, but pieces of you. What if you don't own those things? What if you could be cast as an extra in a Marvel movie after your death? Because they purchased the rights from one of these places that we clicked our terms of service from. What if we could recreate somebody that we loved back in virtual reality? What would that do to us? There is this concept in human experimentation where we don't even give somebody a choice to participate in a trial because it is far, far, far too dangerous for them. So could a VR coder, a creator, even if somebody asks you to recreate their child, their mother in a VR experience, somebody who has died, should you do that? Should this not be another part of the ethical pledge as a VR creator that you're not going to do this? Well, there's always somebody who is going to give it a try. We have somebody who was jailed for cloning in China. Um, uh, what kind of community could we create in virtual reality creator community that would help people to think about the consequences of their actions in the way that, let's say, Zuckerberg never thought about voter manipulation was going to happen? What if we just took one of these concepts that we could all maybe agree on and say that we're not going to recreate somebody who is dead because it would have too much of a traumatic effect on the person who is asking us for that experience. Or maybe you would say, no, we're not going to do that. Buyer beware. You might have a libertarian kind of look to it and say, nope, I really don't think that we should put any kind of blinkers on a virtual reality experience. All right, lastly, like I said, the last episode of The Prisoner is very ambiguous. And many people think, well, the prisoner escapes. So there's our catharsis. But to his dying day, Patrick McGoohan said, the prisoner didn't escape. None of us can really escape. We are all prisoners of the different parts of our lives. It could be our upbringing. It could be our class. It could be our opinions. It could be how we're manipulated by consumer culture or capitalist culture. So I will leave you with that and some of the ideas that I brought up, and give the screen back. So that we can have a discussion of some of the things that I brought up. And thank you for joining us again.
Absolutely awesome. Thank you, Eileen. That was mind-boggling. That was very cool.
Thanks.
And terrifying.
Okay.
I wanted to share a brief story that you reminded me of. I used to tell this a few years ago to kind of describe the power of virtual reality, and maybe it'll instigate some kind of conversation. It's almost exactly related to one of the slides that you had. So I was providing demos to teachers, right, about VR, and this was back in 2017, or actually it might have been 2016, and I was, displaying this stuff to teachers, and they were checking it out, and I was just describing about the power of stuff, and one of the participants put on the headset, and I took her to the bottom of the ocean. There's this gigantic whale that floats by, and she got really emotional. And I had seen in videos that some older people, usually above 60 or so, there's kind of like this reality thing that happens where below a certain age and above a certain age, you're a little more susceptible to what's happening in headset. And so she starts crying, but she's fairly young. She's not at this age where I was watching these other videos where people would start crying. She starts crying, and I said, "Are you okay?" And she goes, "Yeah, I'm fine." And then she really starts crying. And I start to take the headset off of her, and I said, "Are you sure you're okay?" And she goes, "It's just that my husband recently passed away, like in the last year." And I said, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And I said, "Was he a diver? Were you swimmers?" And she goes, No. I could see him there. And I was shocked. Like this was like the first couple of years of the new versions of these headsets. And I said, "See him like you saw him in the water?" And she goes, No. I could see him there. I could see visiting him in this type of technology or this type of headset. And I said, "Okay." And I hadn't thought about that. And she then just kind of, like, the tears went away, and she just stared at me and she said, "Could you put him there?" And I'd never been asked that question before. And I'm a technologist, enough time and money, you can almost do anything. And my response was, yeah, he could be put there. And she was like, "Wow, okay. This technology is going to change the world." And she walked away, grabbed her stuff, and boom, she was out of there. And I I don't think I have yet recovered from that conversation, and that was in 2016. And so your thoughts on love and death, I thought that they were as pertinent now to the conversation as they were then. I'd love to hear your thoughts kind of on those manipulations, and you and I talked a little bit before the presentation about love and like the leader and manipulating someone's feelings of love toward an object or to an ideology. Could you talk a little bit about that?
So I was actually thinking about China and the Uyghurs and the re-education camps that are happening there. And I thought, in the 21st century, what does a re-education camp look like? I mean, during the Cultural Revolution in China, it was labor, it was poverty, it was just a physical exhaustion that led to an emotional exhaustion. It was the type of psychological torture of being made an example of being screamed at. And I said, wow, you don't even have to do that. You don't have to gather enough people to denounce somebody in your village. You just put a headset on somebody, and you could manipulate them through showing them photos of loved ones, and then associating that love eventually with the leader that you want people to follow. I was also thinking about the film A Clockwork Orange, when the protagonist, who is a very violent character, he's an anti-hero. He's really not somebody that we would have much sympathy for, but who is treated for his violence by being shown violent acts repeatedly, and then also being induced to feel illness and sickness. And so then they say, well, he's cured of his extreme violence and antisocial behavior, and they put him back on the street, and he's immediately beat up by his old gang because he can't physically defend himself anymore. And I was just thinking, it doesn't even, you don't even have to be that physically present to try and manipulate somebody to love the leader, to adopt a new concept of work, which is compliance, that will be rewarded with your pay. And you can move your way up into the hierarchy of your job by compliant behavior and a higher score on your behavior or your credit rating. So and then it would really actually challenge human rights activists to redefine what they're looking at. I mean, satellite video can show you those work farms in North Korea, but somebody with a headset in a room would be harder to discover.
That's powerful stuff. Kavya, as Eileen was giving this presentation, I couldn't stop but think of the work that XRSI is doing around recommendations. And this kind of takes it to the next level, where it's not just from a consumer standpoint. What's it look like from, like, how are we advising or even preventing organizations from taking advantage of what they may see as affordances in these systems? Yeah, Miho just brought up GDPR. Yeah, could you speak to that a little bit, Miho? Yeah, the comment there is the EU GDPR attempts to cover the points you've discussed: choice, consent, identity, memory, and giving the rights to users in the digital world to control this. Miho was based in Europe, where most companies, okay, got it. Was based where most companies find GDPR a great bother. It seems US companies hate it even more so. What's the feeling from a user standpoint? Yeah, I would agree. I would agree with that, at least from a business standpoint. But there's also not a lot of, at least in the US, I feel like there hasn't been a lot or much interest in compliance. So how do we put these like things not to do in a in a compliance list somewhere, because they make perfect sense. Eileen, I mean, you've described
Mhm.
something which was
Well,
out.
I,
Go ahead, go ahead. Yeah.
yeah, I want you to remember that people say like 20 and under have a completely different idea about what privacy is and are willing to um, trade privacy for something that they might want. And we have all become sort of just uh, button mashers when it comes to, oh yeah, I'll accept that cookie, oh yeah, I'll accept that terms of service. um, we would have to change our idea of consenting to those contracts and how and the language that they're written in, to really be cognizant of what we're doing when we leave our little digital trail crumbs and who we're giving them to. This big concept, especially in the EU, about the right to be forgotten is really interesting, because I mean, from the standpoint of a journalist, well, if this person is a public figure, um, and they have influence over something, then I should be able to investigate their background and their actions. When is somebody not a public figure? When is it just a minor thing that we're going to uh, the right to forget something? What if we're the right to forget our mistakes? All right. So, I mean, on the good side of it, say someone is falsely accused of something, and then they ask Google to take out of the search, all of these things that are false, that I can prove are false. Well, that's great. But what if it was an experience? What if we asked all of our search engines to forget an experience? I think that was actually done in East Germany when the whole idea of responsibility for the Holocaust or um, atrocities in World War II were forgotten or removed or just not talked about because they did not meet with the ideology of the Communist Party. So there's just another angle on it.
Yeah, Kavi, could you just speak a little bit to some of the stuff that you're doing and kind of how Eileen's stuff, or at least this presentation, lines up with your concerns?
Absolutely. And you guys can hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, Eileen, thank you so much. I got just the tail end of it, but when you were talking about control and choice, do we really have choice? It speaks to me directly. And this is exactly the question. Just because you create two buttons doesn't give us any choice. What choice do I have if I have to choose between this binary choice? And it starts with everything. Like it starts with the very basic of like, oh, let's load up this environment and now we have a choice of gender. It's like, didn't we fight that fight in the real world? Can we have gender neutral avatars to at least begin with? So starting for that very basic premise all the way to, do I really have a choice to get sucked into this 70-page contract that is taking all my psychographic data just with the check a box? So, and then you spoke to this other idea of like, younger people sort of kind of just like willingly giving away their privacy, mortgaging their privacy on the premise of convenience, which I am too. So what do we do? There is this, Eileen has talked about this constant era, like an era of constant reality capture. So as closer we move to it, there are no choices. So XRSI, I'm the founder and CEO of XRSI. We're attempting to bring together like a community effort. So asking the community, what could we potentially do, to mitigate the risks that come from these type of things? We're factoring in the idea that some people are going to move fast and break democracies and cause genocide. So factor that in. And then so we need to hopefully think about decentralization as well as mitigate what they are building. mitigate these choices, tell them how the choices must be made, and demand it all the way at the congressional level. So this is the effort. I'm actually going to type in a URL where you can go, www.xrsi.org/PSF11. So you can find more details about this privacy and safety framework that's currently being built, specifically to answer, when you talk about consent, it includes choice, it includes context, it includes control. And on top of that, what are we going to do in a constant reality capture era? We need to redefine our understanding of privacy, expectation of privacy. What can I expect? So it's very simple. Like if somebody comes to my living room and I've got LiDAR scan and everything type of setup going on, or I'm bringing somebody with the AR glasses in the living room, but like my bedroom should be off limits. There should be technical measures that literally allow me to flip the button and be like, hey, this is off limits, whatever protocols that are exchanging data there. And then all the way to who is this psychographic data going to? Is it going to Blue Cross Blue Shield? So we need transparency so we could demand that do not give my data to the insurance providers because they could deny me coverage based on whatever psychographic profile this digitization of our avatar, our humanness is collecting. So all of these are very complex challenges, and I alone or my advisor, I see Joel is here, Dennis is one of our advisors. We can't do this alone. We need all of you with us to someday stand up with us, one day create these things, talk about it, what Eileen is doing, creating awareness, and just, this is one thing that we can do. Otherwise, when we look back, at least we tried, right? We may not change the future, but we sure as hell are going to try to shape it.
Those are excellent points. I was thinking on two different streams was citizen lobbyists on the edges of technology. And then the other part was instilling in technologists and VR creators an idea of a community of care. I think that would actually be, so many people would argue against, oh no, I can't possibly, what are you talking about? But I would like to see it explored, especially in an educational setting. I talked about having been a moderator for the Socrates Cafe movement, which is being able to talk about philosophy anywhere, anytime, with anybody. And many of the great minds of many of the great civilizations, not just the ancient Greeks, have talked about some of these very concepts about freedom and choice. And it's time to have more people be part of those conversations. And it might be really interesting if, CS degrees or even these new micro degrees that Google is implementing all include some part of ethics, a course in ethics. It seems very old-fashioned, but I actually think this is really what Patrick McGoohan was going on about with his weird culty 60s show. He wanted to talk about these concepts, and he just used this surrealism of the late 60s as a way in to talk about it. But excellent points.
Eileen, was there anything in particular that like kind of worried you or that kind of instigated the development of the presentation? Because I know when you first gave it, it was very early on. I mean, it was a couple of years ago and people were still kind of going, we're not there yet. And then, we saw how, some people have mentioned it here in the chat, how social media went down and kind of the ethics or non-ethics of social media. Was there anything in the VR AR realm that kind of sent up the spidey sense or the red flag for you?
Well, the interesting part is that the whole idea of trying to drill into the head of the prisoner for what was his motivation, and basically this whole village, this whole system, and number two constantly tangling with him to try and get what they thought was the truth, could all just be reduced to a helmet. We could all be prisoners. And we could do it through something, very pleasant. Who thought that Facebook was going to end up with a riot at the US Capitol? I mean, who honestly thought that was going to happen? But now that we have seen it happen, certainly couldn't we package that into our forward thinking? So I guess back when I was doing it, I think it was just the recent 50th anniversary of this concept show that had survived for so long, and that it is actually a virtual reality. The prisoner is removed from his reality and from his choices and put into this manipulated reality, so that his motivations could be made clear to these mysterious people who are manipulating him. So I think that's where it came from.
Hey, Eileen, I was going to drop off. I even told Dennis, but I just want to say, hearing you say January 6th, the day of insurrection, and who would have thought, and especially on a VR, AR, XR panel, it gives me comfort, because those are the dots that a lot of people are not able to connect, that it all leads to that genocidal phenomena or day of insurrection. So what it really comes down to this data economy, this data colonization, and who has this type of data. Some can hack, like Russians can hack that. They have active measures and whatnot. So thank you for embedding that point, these new knowledge and data points and the milestones that are emerging. We need to ensure that our VR XR industry is paying attention to those, because that's the real world impact that we don't want happen. We didn't want Cambridge Analytica. We didn't want Brexit. We didn't want the day of insurrection. All of that because of the data. And XR enables these monsters to have so much data. So thank you for bringing that up. And thank you, Dennis. I just wanted to say that's, please keep adding to this.
Oh, and thanks for your time. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Any other?
Hey,
Go
any
ahead.
other questions or comments, everybody?
I was just going to share that one thing that, great presentation, Eileen. I just wanted to say that one thing that I think it's scary that you think about this stuff and how even, large corporations could use our data to, in a way, control us in regards to, say, insurance policies, things like that. There's a lot of companies implementing health programs into their businesses. And, if you think about a lot of that stuff, that data is going to be shared with so many people. And this is the stuff that we really should be worried about, because it is a control piece.
Yeah, that's a good point. Anything you would have wanted to expand it on, Eileen? Was there anything maybe that during the last presentation got skipped over, or that you've seen since?
Oh, I don't know, because I don't have a bio background, more about manipulations that could be done with I guess, what could we say, the interplay between a VR experience and the biochemical experience in your brain. So in The Prisoner, he's drugged on more than one occasion, and you would think he would stop drinking the tea so that he would not end up as a lab rat as often as he does. But again, it was following the LSD experimentation, and so it was a theme at that time. But I mean, without having somebody have an injection or take a pill, we could give them an experience in the VR helmet that induces a chemical reaction. And I think, I was talking to Dennis about this, and since there are no children present, recently a family therapist was finally asked, how many dates should you go on with a person before you sleep with them? And she said at least a dozen, because once you sleep with somebody and the hormonal release that comes from climax will actually manipulate your perception of the other person. So you really should talk about all of those higher function concepts that you're looking for in a companion. What are their political beliefs? What do they think about child rearing? Long before you sleep with them, because that act actually has a manipulative effect on what you would think about what they say afterwards. So I wonder, I mean, I don't have enough experience with biology to know if you could induce that same reaction through a VR experience. That doesn't even have to be sexy, but could you do that? And then after you have all these love hormones, cooking through your brain, then it's like, hey, vote for this guy. Or, hey, forget all of your cultural traditions and follow the leader. Or, hey, betray the people who are, about to take back the government, or, whatever you need to do. I was thinking of 1984. I don't know why. I think because the latest movie has become free available, and it must have popped up in one of my algorithms that I would be interested in seeing it again. You don't have to put a cage of rats on Winston's head to make him betray his compatriots. You just have to make him think that you're going to put, a cage of rats on his head, or just put a helmet on his head that, has the rat experience loaded up. So that would be an interesting concept to follow through. And then, okay, so you're a parent and you think, oh, well, I let my kid mash buttons, play Sesame Street games and things like that. What would the consequence to a developing brain be of having on a VR helmet? What are the biological consequences? So that would be interesting.
Very good points. Don, you were going to say something there.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird because it's like it's an entirely new medium, and we have to consider it as such. But these sorts of attitude changing, behavior changing mechanisms exist for film and gaming and all that stuff, and that's like well documented in the literature. So I just wonder, like, are we basically just saying here that we need an IRB for VR, like just like we always need to keep track of the human ethics side of it, and like we need a dedicated organization for it? Is that really like the main solution here? Or
For those that may not be familiar, can you describe what an IRB is?
the IRB is in academic studies, it's a institutional review board, and it basically ensures the human rights of the participants that you're studying. And like that's more of in an academic sense, but of course there's these ethical considerations that you have to have in the corporate world or wherever else too. And it's basically to counteract like unethical, inhumane human experiments, which did happen in like Nazi Germany or in like the Tuskegee experiments. But yeah, it's basically that.
You all are making me think about two different things, one of which I helped create and another which I was a participant of. The first one was the Holocaust experience. And early on when we first started this meetup, I helped work on this thing that the UN has taken to different Holocaust museums throughout the world, and incredibly immersive. But I realized very quickly when giving the demonstration that I needed to give some kind of warning, because there were many people that would just start crying, and that's the goal of the director. And there are manipulations that are occurring. There's actually a moment, and I'm usually looking for it. I know that the director planned for it, which is when you're in the showers in this concentration camp, and this is an actual scan of Mayanik in Poland, there's a moment when the storyteller is telling his real life story of what occurred in those showers and how they would be gassed. He points up to the shower heads, and we know that you're hooked when you look up because your brain has kind of forgotten that you're in headset. And so the moment that you look up, you're in. And as long as you look up, we know that you've engaged it, and you're not somewhere else. You're there. You're in Poland. So that was one. The other one you made me think of, Eileen, is I went to a David Lynch. It was a like a movie concert entertainment thing. It was a festival, and its main focus was around transcendental meditation. And in the back was this one person with a VR setup, and this was probably end of 2016, maybe beginning of 2017. And it was a transcendental meditation application, which I didn't think much of at first, because when people say, oh, yoga or meditation or mindfulness in VR, it's usually very shoddily done. It's not done very well. It's a 360 video of somebody trying to calm you while you're on the beach or something. But this thing was weird. It was like shapes were coming out of my mouth when I tried to speak, and it was like I was an androgynous figure floating in space. It was super weird. And I went with one of my family members, and I was drugged. I mean, I was drugged by the VR. And you and I, Eileen, have had this conversation where I thought that like half an hour passed, and my brain was like doing weird stuff. I got into this giddy loop where I couldn't stop giggling. And that's when the developer was like, and you're done, and takes the headset off me and my relative. And this is kind of like a delicate scenario because I know I've been drugged and I'm standing facing, someone that I'm related to. And how do I wasn't planning on getting drugged. And they look at me and they go, we were just high, right? And I was like, oh my God. And it blew my mind. And I asked the developer, I said, how long were we under? And he said, how long do you think? And I said, 20 minutes, at least 20 minutes. And he shook his head and he goes, nah, 4 minutes. And what could you do in those 4 minutes? How could you influence somebody? And in this case, there was no label, there was no warning. I've since seen videos of children using it, right? And so all your points, Eileen, I think are things that we should be incredibly cautious of, or mindful of, and then cautious in our implementation of.
That brings up a short story that John Varley wrote called Blue Champagne. And so what if we could take the joy that you felt in that experience and sell it to the next person? So in this story, a woman has been in an accident and she's completely paralyzed. So she's given a synthetic neurological system, and it's extremely expensive. She can't possibly afford it. So she makes a deal with the medical company to sell her experiences, which will then be used in VR movies, with the shell of another, say, actress performing what has happened in her real life. And in her life, she falls in love with someone, and then she decides, I don't want to sell my experiences anymore because I don't want to sell this feeling. I want some privacy. And they said, well, great. Then you're going to spend the rest of your life locked into your body because you can't afford to operate your nervous system anymore. So, spoiler, sad end to the story is that she breaks up. The man that she was in love with recognizes his intimate experience of falling in love from her perspective when he watches it in a VR movie experience. So I think we've thought about these concepts 20 years ago, maybe. And it's certainly something that we we should take up whenever anybody's going to make an investment. How about we ask all of these angel investors, hey, when somebody's giving you their pitch, ask them, so where's your ethics board? Who are your ethical advisors to the consequences of your technology?
Very good point. Any other questions or thoughts? This has been just absolutely incredible. So thank you, Eileen.
And lots of great comments from Lori in the chat, so don't miss those.
Yeah, so I'll read some of that back there. So actually, Lori, if you've got a mic, are you able to actually explain a little bit of that, what you just described, Hypatia and the system that you work with?
Hi.
Hey.
Oh. Hi. I have kids running around, so I expect interruptions. Not exactly sure what you'd like me to speak to in that regard, but
just unexpected use cases, that kind of thing. Yeah.
To me, all of this brings to mind the fact that even really nice developers, and we had a team of 30 people who were really conscientious, and the leadership that included myself pushed hard to make sure we were taking into consideration these potential, to me, VR and immersion and even just games and even less so film, to me all seem to have a superpower that we really need to be conscious of. And I think, you know, the same is true of social media, and social media really paints a very important, or gives a very important lesson to the dangers that we need to be aware of. And I think that some of the danger we're not going to be able to predict, and it's scary. I was listening to all of this as a domestic violence survivor, as I mentioned earlier, and I knew it was going to be tricky listening to this, that it would be some heavy content, but I'm really glad, and I appreciate that you're bringing this, the potential consequences to the forefront, especially with a community like ours that Dennis and the folks at Baltu have kind of curated as, you know, focusing on ethics and focusing on, you know, the for good part is not just a fun word to say. So it's important. And that's one of the reasons why I enjoy being a part of this community. So thank you, Eileen, and thank you, Kavya, and thank you, Dennis. You're always, this is not the first time that you've touched on this subject. But so I don't know, is there anything else I can say about, specifically as a developer? We really are just flying blind. I think that's a really important thing to note. You know, we cannot rely on the good intentions of developers. We have to seek to constrain this superpower in, you know, collectively as a community, and try and influence it for good, because people typing away at their computers, developing content, they're going to be just as blindsided as the users who are maybe harmed by the content that we produce, because, you know, like I said, the Zuckerberg is a great example. You know, he was just a college kid looking for a way to hook up. He didn't think about that his product could influence economies and elections and health, global health, and you know, so, and it's really not okay that it has so much influence, but because this technology is so powerful, I think it has a potential for snowballing bigger than what the systems that are in place, like Kavia's work, where we're looking at security and privacy, you know, it can snowball beyond what we anticipate. So it's just, I think it's, I don't want to scare people, but I think it's really important to be conscientious. And so thank you for spreading that conscientiousness.
You're welcome.
I hate being on camera, so bye.
Thanks for that. Unless there's anything else you want to cover, Eileen,
No, thanks everybody for your attention, and go binge watch The Prisoner. It's free on Shout Factory, and I think you'll find it rewarding.
And you put the link for us up on Meetup, so I'm gonna grab that link again, and I'm gonna put it here so people can see it. Just 1 second. And here it is for anybody that's interested in that. Yeah, I would say easily one of the best presentations we've had in the last 4 years. So thank you. That was awesome.
You're
Yeah,
welcome.
thank you so much, Eileen.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great night, and thanks for joining us.
You too. Thank you.